"My queen, this isn't your chamber," I said. She smirked. It is now HFY, the royal capital of Sithar, was a city like no other. The streets, lit by the glow of floating lanterns, were always bustling with activity, even under the night sky. The palace, a towering structure of gleaming silver and obsidian, sat at the heart of the city. Its high walls were designed to keep enemies at bay, but also to hold a wealth of power and secrets that could shape the future of the entire galaxy. But on this night, something was amiss. The usual quiet that fell over the palace after dark was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps echoing through its grand halls. The guards, stationed in their usual positions, were caught off guard. A lone figure moved through the palace, swift and silent, like a shadow slipping through the cracks of reality itself. The figure was a human, an exile from Earth. His name was Kale, a warrior who had been sent to distant worlds to fight in battles that were not his own. But he had grown tired of the endless war, tired of being used as a tool in someone else's game. When his mission was completed, he was cast away, exiled to a world where he had no ties, no friends, and no purpose. But he had survived, as he always did. He had made a life for himself in the royal city, working as a mercenary and protecting the fragile peace that had been established after years of bloodshed. Kale was a man of few words. He preferred to let his actions speak for him. He had seen the horrors of war up close, and it had left its mark on him. His once bright eyes were now darkened with the weight of everything he had endured. His face, though still youthful, bore the scars of a life spent in combat. But he had a certain presence about him, a quiet confidence that made others think twice before crossing him. Tonight, however, Kale was not on a mission. He was merely doing his usual patrol, ensuring that the palace was safe. He had walked the halls countless times, familiar with every turn, every shadow. But as he turned a corner, something felt off. The air in the hallway was different. It was heavier, like something was waiting just beyond his reach. Kale stopped in his tracks, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his sword. He had been trained to notice even the slightest shift in his surroundings, and this was something he couldn't ignore. He moved forward cautiously, each step deliberate and silent. The hallway stretched out before him, bathed in the dim light of floating lanterns. It was quiet, too quiet. He reached a door at the end of the hall, one that he had never noticed before. It was carved with intricate patterns, symbols he didn't recognize. The door was slightly ajar, as if inviting him in. Kale hesitated for only a moment before pushing the door open. Inside, the chamber was dark, save for the soft glow of a few candles scattered around the room. The walls were lined with strange artifacts, relics from a time long past. But what caught Kale's attention was the figure standing in the center of the room. She was tall, with long dark hair that cascaded down her back like a waterfall. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, and her eyes, bright, almost glowing, were locked onto him. There was no surprise in her gaze, no fear. She stood there as if she had been waiting for him all along. Kale's hand instinctively tightened around the hilt of his sword. This woman, she was no ordinary person. He could feel it. The power radiating from her was unlike anything he had ever encountered. She was not just royalty, she was something else entirely. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence in the room stretched on, thick and heavy. Kale didn't move, didn't even blink. He was waiting for her to make the first move. Then she smiled. It was a small smile, but it was enough to send a shiver down Kale's spine. There was something in her smile, something dangerous yet inviting. She didn't seem threatened by his presence, as most would be. No, she looked at him like she had already decided who he was and what he was capable of. "Do you know where you are?" she asked, her voice smooth and confident, yet carrying an edge that was impossible to ignore. Kale didn't answer right away. He couldn't quite explain why, but something about her voice, the way she spoke, made him cautious. He had faced many enemies in his life, some who had been just as powerful as she seemed, but there was something different about this one, something unsettling. He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "This isn't your chamber," he said, his voice low, controlled. She didn't flinch, didn't seem surprised. Instead, she let out a soft chuckle, a sound that echoed through the quiet room. "It is now." Kale's heart skipped a beat. Her words were casual, but the meaning behind them was clear. This woman, this queen, was not someone who followed rules. She made them. And right now, she was claiming this space as her own. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. How had he missed this chamber? How had he walked right into it without even realizing? And more importantly, why was she here? Kale took a slow, steady breath, his grip tightening on the sword hilt. He wasn't afraid, but he wasn't foolish enough to underestimate her. He could sense the power that emanated from her, a force that was as ancient as it was terrifying. But he also knew something else. This was a test. A game, perhaps, to see how he would react. The queen stepped closer, her movements fluid and graceful, like a predator circling its prey. "You're different," she said, her voice dripping with intrigue. "Most would have turned and run by now, but you stay. Why?" Kale didn't know how to answer. He wasn't sure why he hadn't turned and left, why he hadn't run when he first sensed something was wrong. There was just something about her, something that made him want to stay and figure her out. It wasn't fear, it was curiosity, but he knew better than to let it show. "Because I'm not afraid of you," Kale said, his voice steady. The queen's smile widened. "I like that," she said, her tone almost playful. "You have spirit, human, but do you have what it takes to survive here?" Kale didn't answer. He didn't need to. He had survived countless battles, countless encounters with enemies far more powerful than her. But something told him this would be different. The queen's eyes glowed brighter as she stepped even closer, closing the distance between them. "I know what you are," she said, her voice a mere whisper. "You're a warrior, but you're also an outsider, a loner. You think you can just walk into my palace, into my chamber, and leave whenever you want. No, human, you are mine now." Kale felt a chill run down his spine, but he didn't flinch. His instincts screamed at him to fight, to draw his sword and defend himself, but he held back. There was something about her, something in the way she spoke that made him think twice. He wasn't sure what her game was, but he wasn't about to play into it blindly. "Why did you bring me here?" he asked, his voice demanding an answer. The queen tilted her head slightly, as if considering his question. "Because I wanted to see if you were worthy," she said, her tone cool and collected. "And you are. You have the strength I need, the will to survive, and that human makes you valuable to me." Kale frowned. "Valuable for what?" Her smile returned, though it was now colder, more calculating. "That, my dear human, is for me to decide." Kale stood still, his mind racing as the queen's words echoed in the air. The room seemed to grow colder, the weight of her gaze heavier than before. She hadn't moved an inch, yet she held the power to make him feel as if the walls were closing in. The queen's presence was palpable, like an invisible force that bent the very air around her to her will. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into something much larger than himself, something he couldn't possibly understand, no matter how many battles he had fought in or how many worlds he had traveled to. This queen, this woman, was different. She wasn't just powerful, she was a force of nature, and he was caught in her web. "Valuable," Kale repeated, his voice calm but his mind already turning. "Valuable for what exactly?" The queen smiled again, that small, knowing smile. "You'll find out soon enough. But for now, let's see what you're really made of." Before Kale could respond, she turned away, moving with a fluidity that made it seem like she was gliding rather than walking. She approached a set of chairs, the only furnishings in the room, and gestured for him to sit. "Come," she said, her voice softer now. "Let us talk." Kale hesitated for a moment, then lowered his hand from the hilt of his sword. This wasn't a fight, not yet at least. He knew better than to rush into something he didn't understand. So he stepped forward and took a seat across from her, watching her carefully. The queen sat down gracefully, her posture regal, but there was something in her eyes that didn't quite match her composed demeanor. There was something. Restless, something that Kale couldn't quite place. It made him wonder about the woman behind the mask of royalty. "You must have questions," she said, breaking the silence. "Go ahead, ask them." Kale narrowed his eyes. He had questions, sure, but he wasn't sure where to begin. "Why bring me here?" he asked after a moment. "What do you want from me?" The queen leaned forward, her elbows resting on the arms of the chair. "I want to see if you are what they say you are," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "A warrior, a survivor. A man who has fought and bled in the name of something greater than himself." Kale's jaw tightened. He had heard stories about himself, legends, even passed around by those who didn't really know him. They called him a hero, a savior. But Kale didn't see himself that way. He was just a man who had survived time and time again by relying on his instincts, his training, and the sheer will to live. That's all he was. "I'm no hero," Kale replied, his voice steady. "I'm just someone who fights to stay alive." The queen's lips quirked upwards slightly, though there was no humor in her expression. "And that, I think, is why you're interesting. You don't believe in honor or glory. You don't care for titles or fame. You fight because it's the only thing you know how to do." And that makes you more dangerous than you realize. Kale leaned back in his chair, studying her closely. Dangerous, he repeated, his tone skeptical. I'm just a soldier. What could I possibly do to you? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood up and walked to a nearby window, looking out over the palace grounds. Kale followed her gaze, seeing nothing but the vast expanse of the city below, bathed in the soft glow of artificial lights. It was beautiful in its way. But it was also a reminder of how far removed he was from everything he had once known. You've been on the run for a long time, haven't you? The queen asked, her voice distant now, as if lost in thought. Hiding, fighting for survival. But all that time, you've been part of a much larger game. A game that you didn't choose, but one that you were born into. Kale frowned. He hadn't expected this kind of conversation. She was talking as if she knew him, as if she had been watching him all along. And maybe she had. She was the queen of a vast empire. It was entirely possible that she had eyes everywhere. You don't know anything about me? Kale said, his voice a little sharper now. I didn't choose this life, it was forced on me. The queen turned to face him, her eyes locked onto his with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. We are all born into lives we didn't choose, she said softly. But that doesn't change the fact that we must live them. And sometimes, the only way to survive is to embrace the chaos around us. Kale stared at her, unsure of what to say. There was something in her words that resonated with him, something that made him wonder if, just maybe, they weren't so different after all. She had chosen this life of power and influence, but had she ever really wanted it? Had she ever longed for something else? He didn't know, but something told him that he would soon find out. Why me? He asked again, his voice quieter this time. Why bring me into your plans? What do you need from someone like me? The queen studied him for a moment before speaking. I need someone who understands what it's like to fight for nothing, she said, her tone soft but filled with an edge of steel. Someone who can see beyond the lies and the politics. Someone who doesn't care about the price of victory, only the result. Kale raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. He had spent enough time on the battlefield to understand that victory always came at a cost. The real question was, how much was he willing to pay for it? You're a survivor, Kale, the queen continued, her voice almost gentle now. And that's what I need. I need someone who can survive when everything else crumbles. When the empire falls apart, when the alliances break, and when everyone else is ready to surrender, I need someone who will stand firm and fight back. Kale felt a pang of something he couldn't name. He had always been a fighter, always been able to survive. But he had never fought for a cause, never fought for anything larger than himself. And now this queen, this powerful, dangerous woman, was offering him a chance to be a part of something greater. But was it worth it? Could he really trust her? He wasn't sure. You're asking me to fight for you, Kale said slowly, and for what? Power, control? The queen's expression softened slightly. No, she said quietly. I'm asking you to fight for something that matters more than that. I'm asking you to fight for a future. Kale stood up, feeling the weight of her words settle over him like a heavy cloak. He didn't know what the future held or what his place in it was supposed to be. But for the first time in a long time, he felt something stir inside him, a sense of purpose, a desire to do something more than just survive. He turned to the queen, his eyes meeting hers. What's the plan? He asked, his voice steady. The queen's smile returned, colder this time, but no less confident. First, we need to see if you're truly ready to join me. There are many who will try to stop us, many who won't want to see this empire change. But I have no doubt that you can handle whatever comes next. After all, you're a survivor, Kale, and that's what we need. Kale didn't respond. He simply nodded, understanding that this was the moment that would change everything. Whatever came next, he would face it. After all, that was what he did best. Survive, Kale had always prided himself on his ability to adapt, to survive in the most chaotic and hostile environments. But as he sat across from the queen, listening to her words and feeling the weight of her gaze, he realized that nothing he had faced before could prepare him for what was coming next. She wasn't just any ruler. She was a woman who had clawed her way to the top, and now she was offering him a chance to be part of her empire, a chance to fight for something bigger than himself. But there was a catch. There always was. I don't trust easily, Kale said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but there was a firmness in his words that left no room for doubt. You're asking me to fight for you, but I don't know what you really want. What's your game? The queen leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. For a moment she said nothing, as if weighing his question carefully. Then she spoke, her voice as calm as ever, but with a hint of something darker beneath it. "Power," she said simply. "I want power, Kale, but not just for myself. I want to reshape this galaxy. To build something that will last, something that will endure long after I'm gone." Kale frowned. "And you think I'm the one who can help you do that? A mercenary, an exile with nothing but a sword and a past full of blood." The Queen's eyes flashed with something like amusement, but she didn't answer his question directly. Instead, she stood up, her movements graceful and fluid, as if every step she took was part of a calculated performance. She walked over to a large map spread out on a table near the window, pointing to various planets, stars, and trade routes that covered the galaxy. "This is my empire," she said, gesturing to the map. "It stretches across countless systems, each one filled with its own problems, its own factions, its own people. Some of them are loyal, but most are not. And those who aren't loyal, those who threaten my power, must be dealt with." Kale stood up and walked over to her, glancing at the map. It was a sprawling thing, filled with intricate details and markings that spoke of years of conquest and diplomacy. He could see the vastness of the Queen's domain, and he understood immediately that it was not a kingdom she ruled, but a fragile web of power that could unravel at any moment. "And you want me to help you keep it together," he said. "By fighting for you, by doing your dirty work." The Queen turned to face him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Yes, but not just that. I need someone who can think beyond the battlefield, someone who can outsmart our enemies, who can see the bigger picture. You, Kale, are more than just a soldier. You're a survivor, and that's what I need right now." Kale wasn't sure if he believed her. He had seen enough power struggles in his life to know that nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. The Queen had her reasons for offering him a place at her side, but what those reasons were, he didn't know, and maybe he never would. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this," Kale said. "I've never cared about power. I've only ever cared about staying alive." The Queen took a step closer to him, her presence commanding. "That's exactly why you're perfect for the job. You don't care about power. You don't care about titles or alliances. You only care about the outcome. And that's what makes you dangerous." Kale studied her for a long moment, feeling the tension between them build. She was right, in a way. He didn't care about the politics, the backstabbing, or the games that rulers played. He had seen enough of that to last a lifetime. But if there was one thing he understood, it was survival. And if aligning with her was the key to surviving whatever storm was coming, then maybe it was worth considering. "Fine," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "I'll help you, but only until I've seen enough. If I don't like what I see, I'm out." The Queen smiled, a small but satisfied curve of her lips. "Fair enough, but be warned, Kale, once you're in, there's no going back." The next few days were a blur. Kale was thrust into the heart of the Queen's operations, quickly learning the true extent of her power and influence. She wasn't just a ruler, she was a strategist, a master manipulator who understood the balance of power better than anyone Kale had ever met. He was introduced to her inner circle, advisors, generals, and diplomats who served the Queen with unwavering loyalty. Some of them were cautious around him, unsure of what to make of the outsider. Others were more welcoming, eager to see what kind of man Kale really was. But none of them knew what it was like to live the way he had, to fight in the shadows, to survive by any means necessary. Kale spent his days learning the ropes, studying the Queen's plans, reviewing intelligence reports, and learning about the enemies who threatened her rule. There were countless factions vying for control of the galaxy, and the Queen was locked in a constant battle to maintain her dominance. There were the rebels, of course, but they were only the beginning. There were also rival empires, trade guilds, and mercenary groups, each with its own agenda and ambitions. And then there was the most dangerous threat of all, the Council, a shadowy group of powerful individuals who manipulated the galaxy's politics from behind the scenes. They were the real power in the galaxy, and they had no intention of letting the Queen, or anyone else, stand in their way. Kale found himself in the Queen's confidence more and more. She trusted him with information that she didn't share with anyone else, not even her closest advisors. And as he learned more about the intricacies of her empire, he began to understand the depth of the challenges she faced. One night, after a particularly tense meeting with her council, the Queen summoned Kale to her private chambers. He entered the room to find her standing by the window, looking out over the city. The lights of the capital shimmered in the distance, a reminder of the power she held but also of the fragility of it all. "You're learning quickly," she said without turning to face him. "I'm impressed." Kale didn't respond immediately. He had learned a lot in a short time, but it was all starting to feel overwhelming. The stakes were higher than anything he had ever faced before. He had always been a fighter, a soldier, but this was something else entirely. "I've seen the way you work," he said after a pause. "You don't just fight your enemies, you control them, manipulate them." The queen turned to face him, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Everyone plays their part, Kale. The galaxy is a game, and in this game only the strongest survive." Kale nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. "So what's the next move?" The queen smiled, her gaze intense. "The next move is simple. We take control of the council. And when we do, nothing will stand in our way." The days following the queen's ominous declaration were filled with a tension that Kale could almost taste in the air. He had joined the queen's cause, but now he understood that the true battle had only just begun. The council, the shadowy group that pulled the strings behind the scenes, had always been the queen's greatest threat. They were the real power in the galaxy, and their influence extended far beyond the walls of her palace. Kale spent the next several weeks working alongside the queen's most trusted advisors, studying the council's every move, looking for cracks in their carefully constructed facade. The more Kale learned, the more he realized that the council's hold on the galaxy was not just political, it was personal. They had their hands in everything, from the trade routes that supplied the galaxy with essential resources to the hidden alliances that stretched across planets and empires. The Queen's strategy was clear. She wanted to dismantle the Council piece by piece until nothing remained of their power. But to do that, they needed a plan that went beyond mere force. The Council's strength lay in its secrecy, its ability to manipulate events from the shadows. And if Kale had learned anything in his life, it was that those who controlled the shadows controlled everything. "How do you plan to break them?" Kale asked one evening as they sat together in the Queen's private chambers. The walls around them were adorned with maps and documents, the strategy for the coming months laid out in painstaking detail. The Queen, standing at the window, gazed out over the city. Her expression was as unreadable as ever, but Kale could see the flicker of determination in her eyes. "We'll start with the weakest link," she said, her voice steady and cold. "We have to divide them. Find the one who has the most to lose, the one who's willing to betray the others in order to protect their own interests." Kale nodded slowly, understanding the Queen's plan. It wasn't enough to defeat the Council by force. They had to fracture their unity first. If they could turn one of the Council members against the others, the whole system would collapse. But that would be easier said than done. The Council members were all powerful in their own right, each one holding a position that was vital to the stability of the Empire. "We have to be careful," Kale warned. "If we make one wrong move, we could lose everything." The Queen smiled, her lips curling into a dangerous grin. "I'm not afraid of losing everything. I've already lost more than most could imagine. What I fear is not acting at all." The plan was set into motion quickly. Kale's role was simple: gain the trust of the Council member who was believed to be the most vulnerable, the one whose political power was built on lies and deception. This particular Council member, known as Maris, controlled one of the most important trade routes in the galaxy. His wealth and influence were immense, but so were his enemies. Maris had made enemies of nearly everyone in the Council, and the Queen believed that he could be manipulated into turning against the others. Kale's first task was to get close to Maris, to enter his world and learn his secrets. Maris was known for his lavish parties, for surrounding himself with those who could offer him something: wealth, power, or status. It was a world Kale was no stranger to. He had spent years among the rich and powerful, learning how to blend in, how to play their games. But this time, it was different. He wasn't just looking to survive. He was looking to manipulate the manipulator. Kale attended one of Maris's parties, posing as a wealthy mercenary looking to expand his influence in the galaxy. It didn't take long for Maris to notice him. The Council member was a master of reading people, and Kale had no intention of hiding his true nature. He wanted Maris to see him as a threat, someone who could potentially bring him down. It was a dangerous game, but Kale had played it before. And if everything went according to plan, it would bring them one step closer to taking down the Council. At first, Maris was cautious. He watched Kale from a distance, never revealing too much of his hand, but Kale was patient. He spent days circulating through the upper echelons of Morris's circle, engaging in subtle conversations that hinted at his own power and connections. Slowly, he began to make an impression. He was a man of few words, but those words carried weight. He didn't need to speak much. His actions spoke louder than anything he could say. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Kale was invited to a private meeting with Morris. The council member had seen enough to realize that Kale could be useful. He had also seen the danger Kale posed. Morris was no fool. He knew that Kale wasn't here for casual conversation, but he was willing to take the risk. That was Morris's greatest flaw. He was always willing to gamble. When Kale entered Morris's private chambers, he was greeted with the usual display of wealth: golden statues, rare artifacts from across the galaxy, and opulent furnishings. Morris sat at a large table, his face expressionless as he gestured for Kale to take a seat. "I've been watching you, Kale," Morris said, his voice low and smooth. "And I must admit, you're quite the enigma. You've managed to make quite an impression on the right people." Kale didn't respond immediately. He studied the council member, taking in his every movement, his every gesture. Morris was a man who had built his power on lies, on backroom deals and ruthless ambition. He didn't care who he had to step on to get what he wanted, as long as it led to more wealth and influence. "Thank you," Kale said finally, his voice calm but firm. "I've been trying to do just that, but I've also been wondering something. If you're so powerful, why do you continue to surround yourself with people who are only using you?" Morris's expression didn't change, but Kale could see the flicker of suspicion in his eyes. "What are you implying?" he asked, his tone cold. "I'm just saying that it's not always about who you know," Kale replied, leaning in slightly. "It's about what you can offer them." "And the truth is, you're running out of things to offer." Morris's face hardened. "I don't need to explain myself to you." "Then why are you here?" Kale shot back, his gaze unwavering. "Why have you invited me into your home if you're so sure of your position?" The silence stretched between them, thick and tense. Morris was clearly calculating his next move, trying to figure out how much Kale knew, how much he could trust him. Kale had already won. He had planted the seed of doubt in Morris's mind. Now all he had to do was wait. "You're clever, Kale," Morris said at last, his voice softer. "But what do you want from me? Power? Wealth? Or do you just want a place at the Queen's side?" Kale leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the edge of the table. "I don't want anything from you, Morris," he said, his voice even. "But you're in a position where you have a lot to lose, and there are people who want to see you fall, people who would use you as a pawn in their game. But if you side with the right people, you might just survive. The Queen could be the ally you need." Morris stared at him for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as he processed Kale's words. "And what makes you think I'd ever trust her?" he asked. Kale's lips curled into a smile. "Because she's the only one who can protect you from the people who want to see you destroyed." The night stretched on as Kale waited for Morris to make his decision. The council member had been silent for a long while, lost in thought, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. The tension in the room was thick, almost unbearable, but Kale remained still, unmoving, his eyes never leaving Morris's face. He had done his part, planted the seeds of doubt, offered a glimpse of a way out. Now it was up to Morris to decide whether he would take the offer or let it slip away. Morris finally broke the silence, his voice calm but laced with uncertainty. "You think the Queen will protect me? You really believe she's the answer to all my problems?" Kale didn't respond right away. He understood the hesitation. Trust was a currency in the galaxy, and it was one that was hard to earn. Morris had every reason to be suspicious. But Kale knew something Morris didn't, something that could tip the scales in their favor. "I don't think the Queen will protect you," Kale said slowly. "I know she will, because she's already thinking one step ahead. She's already planned for everything, and that's why she'll win. It's why you should be on her side, Morris, the Council. They don't see the bigger picture. They're focused on power, on control. But the Queen, she's focused on something far more important: survival." Morris's eyes narrowed, his gaze sharp and calculating. He was considering Kale's words, but it was clear that trust didn't come easily for him. He was a man who had fought his way to the top, and he wasn't about to hand over his loyalty to anyone, not without seeing proof of their strength. "You speak of survival," Morris said, his voice low. "But survival alone isn't enough, is it? You don't just want to survive, Kale, you want to dominate. You want to take control of everything, just like the Queen. Kale felt a flicker of something in his chest. Survival is everything, he said, his voice firm. The galaxy doesn't care about your ambitions, your dreams. It doesn't care about loyalty or honor. It only cares about who can outlast the rest. The Queen understands that, and that's why she's the one you should bet on. Mara stood up abruptly, walking over to a nearby window and staring out at the city below. You think she'll win this war then? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. That she'll break the council and take control of everything? Kale didn't hesitate. Yes. The words hung in the air, as if they held more weight than the room itself could bear. Morris was silent for a long time, his back to Kale as he looked out into the night. Kale knew that the decision wasn't something that could be made lightly. Morris had been in power for too long, surrounded by enemies and allies alike. His every move was calculated, his every alliance forged through years of careful manipulation. Finally, Morris turned, his expression unreadable. All right, he said, his voice quiet but resolute. I'll meet with her, but I'm not doing this for you, Kale. I'm doing it for myself, for my future. Kale nodded, the smallest of smiles tugging at his lips. I understand. Just remember, when the time comes, you'll have to make your choice. And the Queen isn't someone you can betray. Morris studied him for a moment, as if trying to gauge the truth in Kale's words. Finally, he gave a curt nod. I'll remember that. The next day, Kale escorted Morris to the Queen's private chambers. The tension between the two men was palpable, but Kale kept his expression neutral, his thoughts focused on the task at hand. Morris had made his choice, but the true test was yet to come. Would he follow through on his alliance with the Queen, or would he try to turn the tables, seeking to play both sides for his own benefit? When they entered the Queen's chambers, she was waiting for them, as composed and regal as ever. Her eyes flicked over to Kale, then to Morris, as she stood from her desk and approached them with a slow, deliberate grace. I trust you had an enlightening conversation, she said, her voice calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. Morris didn't speak at first. He simply stared at the Queen, his face betraying nothing. Kale knew this moment was crucial. Morris had to see the Queen as an ally, as someone who could offer him something real. Otherwise, all of their efforts would be for nothing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Morris spoke. I'm here, he said, his voice hard. But I'm not making any promises. I'll stand with you for now. But don't think for a second that I'm in this for anything other than my own survival. The Queen smiled, a slow, calculating smile. I wouldn't expect anything less, but survival, Morris, is all we have in this galaxy. If we're going to make it through this, we need to be united. She turned her gaze to Kale, her expression unreadable. You've done well, Kale. I knew I could count on you to make this happen. Kale didn't respond. His job was done. Morris had made his choice. Now it was time for the next move. The Queen stepped forward, her voice soft but filled with an authority that Kale had come to respect. We have work to do, she said. The Council won't wait forever. We'll need to strike while we have the upper hand. Over the following weeks, the alliance between the Queen and Morris grew stronger. The Queen was a master at playing the long game, and she knew exactly how to manipulate the Council members who still remained loyal to the old ways. Morris, for all his flaws, was a useful tool, a man who could be bent to her, well, as long as she kept feeding him what he wanted. And Kale, as always, was the silent enforcer, the one who did the dirty work when things went sideways. As they moved closer to their goal, Kale found himself in deeper than he had expected. He had thought this would be a simple mission, a way to survive, to make his life easier. But the more he worked alongside the Queen, the more he realized how much was at stake. This wasn't just about power. This was about control of the galaxy itself, and the Queen wasn't going to stop until she had it all. One evening, after another tense meeting with Morris and a few of the Queen's most trusted advisors, Kale found himself alone in the Queen's chambers. She was sitting by the window, looking out over the city, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the stars. You've come a long way, Kale, she said without turning to him. I never thought I'd see the day when you become one of my most trusted allies. Kale didn't say anything at first. He wasn't sure what to say. He had joined her cause because he saw an opportunity to survive, to make it through the chaos of the galaxy. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted. He had begun to see her not just as a ruler, but as a force, an unstoppable, determined woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. I'm just here to make sure we all survive, Kale said finally. The queen smiled, a cold, knowing smile. We'll survive, Kale. But the question is, what will we have to sacrifice to get there? Kale didn't have an answer for that. He wasn't sure what the queen's ultimate goal was or what she was willing to do to achieve it. But one thing was certain, there was no turning back now. The queen had chosen her path, and Kale had chosen his. All they could do now was keep moving forward, no matter the cost.